Hello and welcome to this week's session of the Natural Balance Hoof Care Corner. We're going to start right off with where we left off last week, talking about toe first landings. And we're going to just go into a little more detail about some of the structures that are involved in that toe first landing effect. We're going to talk about pathologies that are related to a continual toe first landing or when breakover extends ahead of its normal position. Impar ligament strain, suspensory navicular ligament strain, coffin joint pain, degenerative coffin joint disease, and navicular disease if none of these problems are solved early enough in the syndrome. This is the area that we're going to be talking about. This would be the impar ligament. That's the ligament that holds the navicular bone 2P3. You can see it here in this drawing. It has a very broad attachment across the bottom end of the navicular bone and a narrower attachment to the surface of, to the underneath side of P3. If you look at that coffin bone, in this region here, you'll see small holes in the bone. These are vascular channels. You'll see corresponding holes in the navicular bone. The impar ligament attaches between these two areas where these vascular channels are. So most of the blood supply to the navicular bone comes through the coffin bone, passes through the impar ligament into the navicular bone, and that's where most of its nutrients are derived from. This is the type foot that is prone to impar ligament strain and suspensory ligament strain, and it's by all rights kind of a nice looking foot. It's well shod by most standards, but if you look at it very closely, you'll see the upper part is very straight right through here, and it maintains a fairly straight conformation, wanting to be properly oriented towards to the dorsal surface of P3, but as it gets down the foot, it has a subtle shift and a migration forward, which means there's a longer than normal toe in this situation, which is going to cause a delay in breakover. And if you look at this diagram, you'll see how it affects the position of the pastern and its relationship to the surface, bottom surface of P3. If you look at this moment, at the time of breakover, it's adding a lot of extra strain in that region of the foot. In cases where the horse is inclined to land toe first, you'll see this situation occur within the coffin joint. And as we illustrated last week at the end of our show, and I'll show you again, that if the horse lands toe first, there's a subtle subluxation of the distal end of P2 in the coffin joint. There's a stretching of the impar ligament, a stretching of the suspensory ligament, and a contact in the coffin joint that's not completely uniform throughout that joint. I think that's the important thing, is there's three things that are happening. Strain to the impar ligament right here, strain to the suspensory ligament, and subluxated contact through the coffin joint, like so. Similar situation occurs at the time of breakover. If you look at this diagram here, you'll see that the toe of this foot has not contacted the ground. It's now on the ground. The heel is still off the ground. And you look at this coffin joint, you'll see when the heel goes down, there's a subtle rearward movement of the distal end of P2 and incorrect contact within that coffin joint. Now the foot is starting to load. It's pushing down. The coffin joint is now finally getting lined up, and as we get close to the point of breakover, because this toe is longer than it should be, there's movement of the pastern is too far forward, causing strain on the attaching ligament of that holds the navicular bone up, and also the impar ligament. We'll look at this same scenario from a heel first landing perspective. Heel is within range of the ground, heel contact, toe is yet to come down. Now everything is made equal contact through the ground. You notice the difference between the toe first landing. All of these bones in this lower pastern are lined up perfectly, an assurance that they'll line up every time if the horse lands heel first. That's the important thing. Huge difference between a horse that lands toe first and a horse that lands heel first. As we go through this range of motion, we see that there's no subluxation at the time of ground contact or starting to load. And going through this range of motion, if there's a normal wear that has occurred on the front of the foot, or if the shoe is worn some, the shoe is placed within proper range of the distal end of P3. At the time of breakover occurs very nicely, very subtly, and there's no undue strain on the impar ligament and the suspensory ligament to the navicular bone. And that's basically it in a nutshell. A lot of times it's a matter of just resetting used shoes, or if you're just barefoot trimming, create that natural wear to the front of the foot that is necessary to encourage the horse to get off the ground at the proper time, and to be fully aware of how to recognize hoof distortions early enough to prevent these internal lameness issues. Okay. Toe first landing and heel first landing are somewhat of a new train of thought for a lot of folks, so we're going to show you some examples of horses actually engaging the ground toe first and heel first, just to give you kind of a picture of that. So you look at this segment here, you'll see that horse kicking dirt up in front of himself, and the pastern is articulating backwards, where a heel first landing, on the other hand, the foot is fully extending itself and the toe is coming off the ground just the moment before the foot engages the ground. Totally different than this view right here. If you look at the stick figure along with the way the horse is engaging the ground, you can perceive of what's going on inside of that hoof, inside of the coffin joint. You'll see that rearward articulation of that coffin joint, subluxation. And as the horse goes through his full range of motion, the distal end of P2 has to move forward in the joint before it can be fully flexed. The heel first landing is totally different in that when the heel engages the ground first and the foot is then loaded, the pastern is lined up perfectly every time. All of the structures that support the navicular bone, P2 and P3, are all under no strain, or at least any undue strain at this point in time. I hope that you've been able to grasp a little bit of new information about what to expect from a sound horse and what to expect from a lame horse. What we find is that horses that are continually landing toe first usually have some stumbling problems, or they forge, or they have interference problems and things like that. And these are all early indicators that of horses that are going to have some serious problems later on. So I think it's important to get your eye trained a little bit to see long before these problems occur when they're about to. This is as simple as it gets to be able to understand what structures are involved inside of the foot from this way the horse engages the ground.